When Marcus stepped between the angry businessman and the trembling waitress, he thought he was just doing what any decent person would do. But as the man's fist connected with his jaw and the restaurant erupted in chaos, Marcus realized this moment would unravel everything he'd spent 5 years trying to forget. The woman he saved wasn't a stranger at all. She was the ghost from his past, the one person who knew the truth about the night that destroyed his marriage and sent him fleeing across the country with his daughter. Now she's back, and the secret that's been eating him alive is about to explode in the most public way possible. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The fork trembled in Marcus Chen's hand as he watched his 8-year-old daughter pick at her mac and cheese. Sophie hadn't eaten more than 3 bites, and he could see the exhaustion in her small shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the restaurant's entrance, like she expected someone to walk through those glass doors. "You don't have to finish it," he said quietly, reaching across the red vinyl booth to touch her wrist. "We can get it to go." Sophie looked up at him with those dark eyes that were too old for her face. "Is Mom coming back tonight?" The question hit him like it always did, a swift punch to the solar plexus that left him breathless. 3 months since Elena had walked out. 3 months of Sophie asking the same question in different ways, and Marcus still didn't have an answer that wouldn't break her heart more than it already was. "I don't know, sweetheart." The honesty felt like swallowing glass, but lies had already cost them too much. The diner hummed with the usual Tuesday evening crowd. Truckers hunched over coffee cups, a young couple sharing a milkshake, an elderly man reading a newspaper while his soup went cold. Normal people living normal lives, something Marcus wasn't sure he remembered how to do anymore. Sophie pushed a noodle around her plate. Jenny's mom said Mom's probably not coming back. Jenny said her dad left and never came back either. Marcus set down his coffee cup harder than necessary. The ceramic rang against the saucer. Jenny's mom doesn't know what she's talking about. But what if... Sophie. His voice came out sharper than he intended. He watched her flinch, watched her retreat into that careful stillness she'd perfected since Elena left. The same stillness he'd learned as a kid when his own father's voice carried that particular edge. He softened his tone. "Hey, look at me." She did, reluctantly. Your mom is figuring some things out. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. That's never going to change, okay?" Sophie nodded, but he could see she didn't believe him. How could she? He barely believed it himself. The bell above the diner's entrance chimed, and Marcus glanced up out of habit. A woman in a navy blue uniform walked in, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking like she'd just finished a long shift somewhere. She had that particular exhaustion in her face that Marcus recognized, the bone-deep tiredness that came from smiling at people all day when your own world was falling apart. She took the counter seat 3 stools down from where an older man in an expensive suit was already seated, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, I don't care what Thompson thinks," the suited man was saying, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "The deal closes Friday, or it doesn't close at all." Marcus turned back to Sophie, but she was watching the man too, her small face scrunched with the kind of attention kids paid when adults were being too loud in public spaces. "Daddy," she whispered, "that man is being mean to his phone." Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled. Yeah, he, kind of island. The waitress, a girl who couldn't be older than 19, with purple streaks in her blonde hair and tired eyes that reminded Marcus of Sophie's, approached the suited man with a coffee pot. "More coffee, sir?" "What?" The man looked up from his phone, annoyed. "No, I don't want more coffee. I want you people to figure out how to make a decent cup in the first place." The girl's face flushed. "I'm sorry, sir. I can get you." "Forget it." The man waved her away dismissively and returned to his call. "Thompson's an idiot if he thinks we're renegotiating at this point." Marcus watched the waitress's shoulders slump as she moved toward the woman in the uniform. There was something familiar about the woman's profile, something that made him look twice, but she had her head down, studying the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Can I get you something to drink?" the waitress asked, her voice professionally cheerful, despite what had just happened. "Coffee, please." "Black." The woman's voice was soft, polite. "And maybe the soup special, if you have a minute." "Of course. Tomato basil tonight." "Perfect." Marcus found himself still watching the woman. There was definitely something familiar about her. The way she held her shoulders, the cadence of her voice. But he couldn't place it. And after 5 years in Denver, he'd gotten good at not recognizing people. It was safer that way. Sophie had abandoned her mac and cheese entirely and was building a fortress out of saltine crackers. Her small fingers worked methodically, precisely, the same way Elena used to arrange things when she was anxious. "Impressive architecture," Marcus said, gesturing at the cracker structure. "It's a castle," Sophie said without looking up. "For when the dragons come." Something cold settled in Marcus's chest. "What dragons?" "The loud ones. The ones that make people sad." Before he could ask what she meant, the suited man's voice rose again. "Listen to me carefully, Thompson. I don't care if his wife is in the hospital. Business is business." The waitress was refilling the coffee pot behind the counter, but Marcus could see her hands shaking. The woman in uniform had received her coffee and was staring down into it like it might offer answers to questions she hadn't asked yet. "Some people are just angry all the time," Sophie observed quietly. "Like Mrs. Peterson next door." Mom said Mrs. Peterson's anger isn't about us, but it still makes the walls feel thin. Marcus looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. When had she become so perceptive? When had she learned to read the emotional temperature of a room like she was checking the weather? "Walls don't have feelings, Soph." "No. But people do. And when angry people are loud, it makes the walls feel like they might break." The suited man slammed his phone down on the counter, the sound sharp enough to make several diners look up. The waitress approached him cautiously, like someone approaching a potentially rabid animal. "Sir, is everything—" "No, everything is not all right." The man's voice carried across the diner now, no longer just loud but hostile. "This place is a dump. The coffee tastes like burnt water, and you people clearly don't understand customer service." Marcus felt his jaw clench. Sophie's cracker castle suddenly seemed prophetic. "I'm very sorry you feel that way, sir," the waitress said, her voice smaller now. "Maybe I could. Maybe you could what? Maybe you could magically transform this pathetic excuse for a restaurant into something that doesn't make me regret stopping here." The diner had gone quiet. Even the kitchen sounds seemed muffled. Marcus could feel the collective discomfort of 20 strangers, all pretending not to watch a 19-year-old girl get berated by a man in a suit that probably cost more than she made in 2 months. "I could comp your best meal," the waitress offered desperately. "Or, maybe, I don't want the meal comped. I want competence. I want basic human intelligence. I want—" "You want to stop talking to her like that." The words were out of Marcus's mouth before he'd made a conscious decision to speak. The entire diner turned to look at him, including Sophie, whose eyes had gone wide. The suited man pivoted on his stool, his face already red with indignation. "Excuse me?" Marcus stood up slowly. He was a big man, 6'2", broad shoulders from years of construction work, and he could see the man's confidence waver slightly as Marcus moved toward the counter. "I said you want to stop talking to her like that." Marcus's voice was calm, conversational. "She's trying to help you. There's no need to be cruel about it. This is none of your business. You made it everyone's business when you decided to have your tantrum in public." The woman in the uniform had turned wood, around now, and Marcus caught a full view of her face for the first time. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. Sarah Martinez. She was older now, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, but it was definitely her, the woman who'd been driving the other car. The woman who'd walked away without a scratch while his world had ended in twisted metal and emergency sirens. Their eyes met across the diner, and he watched the same recognition dawn on her face. Her coffee cup shook in her hands. "Marcus?" Her voice was barely a whisper. The suited man was still talking. Something about minding his own business and teaching his daughter better manners. But Marcus couldn't hear him anymore. All he could hear was the sound of screeching brakes and Sarah's voice 5 years ago, saying over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't see the stop sign." "You two know each other?" The suited man's voice cut through the memory. Perfect. Two lowlifes defending the help. That's when something snapped. Marcus had spent 5 years practicing restraint. 5 years learning to swallow his anger, to count to 10, to walk away from confrontation because Sophie was watching, because Elena had already accused him of having too much rage, because he'd promised himself he would never be the kind of man who solved problems with his fists. But watching this man insult a teenager who was just trying to do her job, watching Sarah Martinez, the woman whose mistake had cost him everything, sit there with recognition and guilt written across her face, something in Marcus's carefully constructed control finally gave way. "That's enough," he said, stepping closer to the suited man. "Or what? You'll do something about it?" The man stood up too, puffing out his chest like a bantam rooster. "You think you're intimidating? I deal with union thugs twice your size. I think you should apologize to the waitress and leave. And I think you should go back to your table and mind your own business before this gets ugly." Marcus was aware of Sophie watching from the booth, aware of Sarah's eyes on him, aware of the entire diner holding its breath. 5 years of therapy, 5 years of anger management, 5 years of trying to be a better man than his father had been. "Please," the waitress said quietly. "It's okay. Really. He can just..." "No." Marcus didn't take his eyes off the suited man. "It's not okay. He doesn't get to treat you like garbage because he's having a bad day." The suited man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know what's not okay? What's not okay is some construction worker thinking he can tell his betters how to behave." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. "Apologize. Now. Make me." Later, Marcus would replay this moment 1,000 times. He'd wonder if he could have walked away, if he should have just taken Sophie and left, if there had been another way to de-escalate the situation. But in that moment, with Sarah Martinez watching, and his daughter's words about dragons echoing in his head, Marcus made a choice that would change everything. He grabbed the suited man by the lapels of his expensive jacket and pulled him close enough to smell his cologne. "I said, apologize." The man's response was to spit in Marcus's face. Marcus had been in plays. Exactly 3 fights in his adult life. Once in college, once at a job site, and once 5 years ago in a hospital waiting room, with a man who'd made jokes about car accidents, while Marcus waited to find out if his son would live through the night. He'd won all 3 fights. This one lasted about 4 seconds. The suited man went down hard, his head striking the edge of the counter with a sound that made several people gasp. Blood began pooling beneath his skull almost immediately. The diner erupted in chaos. Someone screamed. The waitress dropped her coffee pot, sending ceramic shards and hot liquid across the floor. Sarah Martinez was on her feet, moving toward the fallen man, with the practiced efficiency of someone with medical training. And Sophie was standing on her seat in the booth, her small hands pressed against the window, staring at her father with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Terror. Pure, absolute terror. "Call 911, Sarah was saying, her hands on the suited man's neck, checking for a pulse. "Now." Marcus stood frozen, watching blood spread across the black and white checkered floor, watching his daughter look at him like he was a stranger, watching the woman whose mistake had destroyed his family 5 years ago try to save the life of a man Marcus might have just killed. The dragons Sophie had been afraid of weren't coming anymore. They were already here. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. Marcus knew because he'd been staring at the clock above the coffee machine, watching the red second hand sweep around and around, while Sarah Martinez worked over the unconscious businessman, and his daughter sat in the booth, silent as stone. 6 minutes of sirens growing louder. 6 minutes of other diners whispering and pointing. 6 minutes of watching Sophie's small face transform from terror to something worse, shame. She was ashamed of him. "Step back, sir." The paramedic was young, maybe 25, with the kind of confidence that came from seeing too much too early. "Let us work." Marcus moved away from the counter, his hands still shaking. There was blood on his knuckles, not his own. The suited man was breathing but hadn't regained consciousness. Sarah had kept pressure on the head wound, her uniform now stained dark red, her face professionally calm in a way that told Marcus she'd done this before. "He's stable," Sarah told the paramedics, stepping back to give them room. "Possible concussion. Laceration to the occipital region. Pulse is steady." One of the paramedics glanced at her. "You medical?" "Army medic. Discharged last year." Of course she was. Of course the woman who'd destroyed his family with her careless driving had spent years saving lives. The irony would have been funny if Marcus weren't watching his own life implode in real time. "Sir?" A police officer appeared at his elbow, an older woman with graying hair and eyes that had seen it all. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. I need to ask you some questions." Marcus looked over at Sophie. She was still pressed against the window, her cracker castle demolished, watching the paramedics load the businessman onto a stretcher. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. He recognized the behavior she was counting. Elena had taught her to count when she got overwhelmed. Can I talk to my daughter first?" Officer Rodriguez followed his gaze. "She witnessed what happened." "Yeah. How old?" 8. The officer's expression softened slightly. "Make it quick. We'll need a full statement." Marcus crossed to the booth on unsteady legs. Sophie didn't look at him when he sat down across from her. "Hey, sweetheart." She kept counting under her breath. 47, 48, 49. "Sophie, look at me." 51, 52. "Sophie." She stopped counting and finally met his eyes. The disappointment there was worse than any anger could have been. "You hurt him," she said quietly. "He was being mean to. You told me we don't hurt people when we're mad." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. I know I said that. You told me that's what makes us different from Grandpa." The mention of his father, dead 3 years now, but still haunting every conversation about anger and control, made Marcus close his eyes. Sophie had never met her grandfather, but she'd heard enough stories. She knew why Marcus had moved them across the country, why he'd spent years in therapy, why he sometimes left the room when voices got too loud on TV. This was different, he said, knowing how weak it sounded. How? How could he explain it to an 8-year-old? How could he tell her about the weight of watching people get hurt when you had the power to stop it? About the impossible mathematics of standing by versus standing up? About how sometimes the world forced you to choose between your principles and your conscience? 0. 2. "I don't know," he said finally. "I don't know how it was different." Sophie looked past him toward the counter, where blood was still pooling, despite the waitress's attempts to clean it up. "Is he going to die?" "No. He's going to be okay." "How do you know?" Marcus turned to look at Sarah, who was speaking quietly with the paramedics. She caught his eye across the diner, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. 5 years of questions hung in the air between them. "Because someone who knows how to help people is taking care of him," Marcus said. The ambulance doors slammed shut outside, and the sirens began to fade. Officer Rodriguez approached their table with a notepad, and the particular expression cops got when they were about to ruin someone's day. "Mr. Chen? I need that statement now." Sophie slid deeper into the booth. "Can I call Mom?" The question hit Marcus like a slap. "Sweetheart, you know Mom's. I want to call Mom." Her voice was firmer now, with an edge he'd never heard before. "I want her to come get me." Marcus looked at Officer Rodriguez, who was pretending not to listen but clearly hearing every word. "We'll talk about it after I don't want to talk about it. I want Mom." She was 8 years old, and already learning that the people you trust most are the ones most capable of disappointing you. Marcus could see the moment happening the moment his daughter stopped believing he was one of the good guys. "Sophie, I want to go home." "We can't go home right now." "I have to." "Not our home." Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. "Real home. With Mom." Officer Rodriguez cleared her throat gently. "Sir? The statement?" Marcus looked around the diner. Half the customers had left, but the ones who remained were still watching him like he was a dangerous animal that might strike again. The teenage waitress was sweeping up ceramic shards, her hands still shaking. The elderly man who'd been reading his newspaper was gone, leaving behind exact change and an untouched bowl of soup. And Sarah Martinez sat at the counter with her back to him, her shoulders rigid with tension, he recognized. "Can I get someone to take my daughter home first?" "Is there someone you can call?" Marcus ran through his limited options. Elena was 3 states away, living in her sister's guest room and not answering his calls. His neighbors barely knew them. They'd moved to the apartment complex only 4 months ago, after Elena kicked him out of the house. His co-workers were acquaintances at best. 5 years in Denver, and he had no one to call. "I'll take her." The voice came from behind him. Sarah Martinez had turned around on her stool and was looking directly at him for the first time since the recognition had hit them both. "Excuse me?" Officer Rodriguez looked between them. "I can take the little girl home," Sarah said. "If that's okay." Marcus stared at her. "I don't think I'm trustworthy," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "I can provide references. And..." She hesitated, glancing at Sophie. "I think she might be more comfortable away from here right now." Sophie was looking at Sarah with curiosity, instead of fear, the first positive emotion Marcus had seen from her since the fight. "You know Daddy?" Sophie asked. Sarah's eyes flicked to Marcus, then back to his daughter. "We met once. A long time ago. Before I was born? You were very little." This was insane. Marcus couldn't let the woman who'd killed his son take his daughter anywhere. But Sophie was nodding, and Officer Rodriguez was looking impatient, and the alternative was having Sophie sit in a police station while he gave his statement and possibly got arrested. "I don't know," Marcus said. "Daddy." Sophie's voice was small but determined. "I don't want to be here anymore." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed it to Officer Rodriguez. "My driver's license and discharge papers are in my car. You can run my background, Sarah Martinez. Clean record except for a traffic violation 5 years ago." Marcus's hands clenched involuntarily. A traffic violation. That's what they called it when you ran a stop sign and killed a 3-year-old boy. But Sophie was already sliding out of the booth, and Sarah was walking toward the door, and Officer Rodriguez was nodding like this was all perfectly normal. "I'll have your daughter back here in an hour," Sarah said quietly, stopping next to Marcus. "I promise." Her voice broke slightly on the word promise, and Marcus realized she was as shaken by this coincidence as he was. But there was something else in her expression. Determination. Maybe. Or desperation. Like this was her chance to make something right. "Where do you live?" she asked. Marcus gave her the address, watching his daughter take Sarah's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like she hadn't just watched her father potentially kill a man. Like she trusted this stranger more than she trusted him right now. Maybe she was right to. "Sophie," Marcus called as they reached the door. "I love you." Sophie looked back at him, and for a moment her face softened. "I know, Daddy. But love isn't enough sometimes, is it?" The words, so mature, so devastating, hung in the air as the door chimed shut behind them. Marcus watched through the window as Sarah helped Sophie into a blue Honda Civic, watched them drive away into the Denver evening, and tried not to think about the last time he'd seen that same car. "Mr. Chen?" Officer Rodriguez had her pen poised over her notepad. "From the beginning, please." Marcus turned back to face her. Back to face the mess he'd made. Back to face the consequences of 6 minutes that had undone 5 years of careful reconstruction. "His name was Tommy," he said quietly. Excuse me? My son. The boy who died in the car accident 5 years ago. His name was Tommy. Officer Rodriguez frowned. Sir, I need you to tell me what happened here tonight. But Marcus was still staring out the window at the empty street, thinking about promises and traffic violations, and the impossible weight of love that wasn't enough. I don't know what happened, he said. I thought I was protecting someone. But maybe I was just angry. Angry about what? Marcus looked at the blood on the floor, at the broken ceramic, at the teenage waitress who was still cleaning up the mess he'd made. Everything, he said. I think I was angry about everything. The statement took 43 minutes. Officer Rodriguez was thorough but not unkind. She'd been a cop for 18 years, she told him, and she'd seen worse. The businessman, his name was Richard Kessler, would likely have a concussion and need stitches, but he wasn't going to die. He might press charges, might not. Depended on his mood when he woke up, and whether his lawyers thought they could make money off the situation. Marcus was released, pending investigation. No arrest, no charges filed yet. Officer Rodriguez gave him her card and told him not to leave town, as if he had anywhere to go. The diner had closed while he was giving his statement. The teenage waitress, her name tag said Michaela, was mopping the floor where Richard Kessler had bled, her movements methodical and tired. Hey, Marcus said as she wrung out the mop. Are you okay? She looked up at him with surprise. Me? Yeah, thank you. For what you did. I mean, I know it got crazy, but... She shrugged. Nobody's ever stood up for me like that before. The gratitude in her voice made Marcus feel worse. Not better. I'm sorry it went so far. My boyfriend says guys like that deserve what they get. Says rich people think they can treat service workers like garbage because they know we can't fight back. Your boyfriend's probably right. But there are better ways to handle it than what I did. Michaela paused in her mopping. Are there? I mean, what were you supposed to do? Let him keep being a jerk? It was the same question Sophie had asked in different words. How was this different? When was standing up the right choice, and when was it just an excuse for violence? Marcus didn't have an answer for the 19-year-old waitress any more than he'd had one for his 8-year-old daughter. I should get going, he said. My daughter's waiting. The lady who took her seemed nice. Yeah. Marcus paused at the door. She did. The drive home took 12 minutes, and Marcus spent every one of them thinking about Sarah Martinez. The last time he'd seen her was at Tommy's funeral, standing in the back of the church like she wanted to disappear into the wall. Elena had wanted her banned from the service, but Marcus had said no. The woman was clearly destroyed by what had happened. Banning her wouldn't bring Tommy back. Elena had called him weak for that decision. Said he was too forgiving, too willing to let people off the hook for their mistakes. Maybe she'd been right. Maybe his marriage would have survived if he'd been angrier, if he'd fought harder against the insurance companies, and the lawyers, and the well-meaning relatives who kept saying everything happened for a reason. But Tommy was still dead either way. His apartment complex was one of those sprawling, anonymous places that looked like every other apartment complex built in the last 20 years. Beige buildings, numbered parking spaces, a pool nobody used because the heating was broken. Marcus had chosen it because it was cheap, and because nobody asked questions about why a man with a good job was living in a place like this instead of a house with a yard and a dog. He climbed the stairs to 2B and found his door unlocked. Sarah and Sophie were sitting on his couch, a photo album open between them. Sophie was pointing at something on the page, talking animatedly for the first time all evening. That's Daddy when he was little, Sophie was saying. Grandma said he was always getting in trouble. Sarah looked up when Marcus entered. She wanted to show me pictures. Marcus closed the door behind him. Noting that Sarah had made herself at home, there were 2 empty glasses on the coffee table, and she'd helped Sophie change out of her school clothes into pajamas. It was domestic in a way that made his chest tight. Did you eat anything? He asked Sophie. Sarah made grilled cheese, and she knows how to make the crust taste good. Of course she did. Of course, the woman who'd killed his son was better at taking care of his daughter than he was. "Sophie, why don't you brush your teeth? It's past bedtime." "But Sarah was telling me about being a soldier." "Medic," Sarah corrected gently. "I fixed people who got hurt." Sophie looked between them, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "Can Sarah read me a story?" "I think Sarah needs to go home now." "Actually," Sarah said quietly, "I was hoping we could talk. After Sophie goes to bed." Marcus wanted to say no. Wanted to thank her for helping with Sophie, and send her on her way, and pretend this was all just a cosmic coincidence that didn't mean anything. But Sophie was looking at him with hope for the first time since the restaurant. And Sarah was looking at him with something that might have been determination or desperation or both. "Fine," he said. "But teeth first, kiddo." Sophie hugged Sarah before heading to the bathroom. "Thank you for taking care of me. Thank you for showing me your pictures." When Sophie was gone, the apartment fell into the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken things. Sarah closed the photo album carefully, running her fingers over the cover. "She looks like him," she said finally. Marcus sat down in the chair across from the couch, maintaining distance. "Sophie?" "Both of them. Sophie looks like Tommy. And Tommy looked like you." Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could see her hands shaking. "I remember from the hospital. You were holding his picture." The memory hit Marcus like a physical blow. Sitting in that waiting room, clutching a school photo while doctors tried to save his son's life. Sarah Martinez hovering near the vending machines, wanting to apologize, to explain, to somehow make it better. He'd told her to leave. Told her he didn't want to hear her excuses. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I mean, really, why did you offer to help tonight?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Because I never got to," she said finally. "Got to what?" "Help. Make it right. Do something useful, instead of just destroying things." Marcus felt his anger building again, the same rage that had gotten him in trouble at the restaurant. "You think taking my daughter home makes up for killing my son?" "No." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Nothing makes up for that. But I've been living in this city for 5 years, and every day I see families with little kids, and every day I remember what I took from you. What I took from him. Then you should have stayed away. I tried. I moved 3 times, changed jobs, went to therapy, joined the army because I thought maybe if I saved enough lives, the math would work out somehow." She looked up at him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "But the math never works out, does it? There's no number of people you can help that brings back the one you killed." Through the thin walls, they could hear Sophie brushing her teeth, humming a song Elena used to sing to her. The normalcy of it felt surreal after everything that had happened. "I dream about him," Sarah continued. "About Tommy. He's always 3 years old, and he's always asking me why I didn't stop, why I didn't see the sign." Marcus closed his eyes. "Don't. I know you probably dream about him too. I know tonight, seeing me, it probably brought it all back. It never left." "No. I don't suppose it did." Sarah stood up, smoothing down her uniform. "I should go." "Wait." Marcus wasn't sure why he said it. "How did you know? About making the crusts taste good?" Sarah paused at the door. "I have a daughter too. Had. She's with her father now. Has been since I got back from overseas." "Why?" "Because PTSD and guilt make you a terrible parent, apparently. And because some mistakes cost you everything. Not just once, but over and over again." Marcus looked at this woman, this stranger who'd shaped his life more than most friends ever had, and saw his own exhaustion reflected back at him. The bone-deep tiredness of carrying grief that never got lighter, only more familiar. "Sarah?" She turned back. "Thank you. For helping her tonight. She needed. She needed someone who wasn't me. She loves you. She told me while we were making sandwiches. She said you're sad all the time now, but she still loves you." The words hit harder than any accusation could have. out of the mouths of babes. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "For all of it. For Tommy, for tonight, for existing, I guess." She left before Marcus could respond, the door closing with a soft click that sounded final. Sophie emerged from the bathroom in dinosaur pajamas, her hair damp from washing her face. "Is Sarah gone?" "Yeah, she's gone. Are you sad?" Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, at the way she'd learned to read his moods, at the careful way she asked questions, at the love in her eyes, despite everything he'd put her through. "Yeah," he said honestly. "I'm sad." Sophie climbed into his lap, something she hadn't done since Elena left. "It's okay to be sad, Daddy. But you don't have to be sad alone." Marcus held his daughter close, and wondered when she'd gotten so wise, when she'd learned to forgive so easily, when she'd started taking care of him instead of the other way around. Outside, he heard a car start up and drive away, carrying Sarah Martinez back to whatever life she'd built from the wreckage of that afternoon 5 years ago. Tommy would have been 8 now. The same age as Sophie. The same age as the daughter Sarah had lost to her own mistakes. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, and listening to Sophie's breathing through the thin walls. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Richard Kessler's head hitting the counter, heard the wet sound of impact, felt the weight of his own fist, connecting with flesh and bone. But underneath that fresh violence was the older nightmare: screeching brakes, twisted metal, and Tommy's voice calling for his daddy from a hospital bed before the machines went quiet. At 3 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Sarah. Sophie forgot her backpack in my car. I can drop it off in the morning." Marcus stared at the message for 10 minutes before typing back, "I'll get it." "Where?" "Mountain View Diner on Colfax." "I worked the breakfast shift." Of course, she did. Of course she worked at another diner, probably dealing with more Richard Kesslers every day, probably taking their abuse, because she believed she deserved it. Marcus deleted 3 different responses before settling on, "What time?" "I get off at 2. But you don't have to come. I can drop it off." "I'll come." He sent the message before he could change his mind, then spent the rest of the night wondering why he'd made that choice. Sophie woke up at 7. P-had into the living room in her dinosaur pajamas, and finding Marcus still on the couch, fully dressed from the night before. "Did you sleep in your clothes, Daddy?" "Couldn't sleep." She climbed onto the couch next to him, studying his face with the serious attention she usually reserved for complicated math problems. "Are you thinking about the angry man?" "Among other things." Sarah said angry people are usually sad people who don't know how to ask for help. Marcus looked at his daughter. "She said that?" "When we were making grilled cheese. She said, sometimes people yell because they're scared their inside voice isn't loud enough." Sophie traced patterns on the couch cushion with her finger. "Like when I yell at you because I miss Mom." The simple psychology of it, delivered by an 8-year-old who'd learned it from a stranger, hit Marcus harder than any therapy session had. "Is that why you've been yelling at me?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "I'm scared you're going to leave too." Marcus pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. Even when I'm sad or angry or stupid, I'm not leaving you. Promise?" "Promise." Even if the police come? The question reminded Marcus that his problems were far from over. Richard Kessler might press charges. There would be consequences for what he'd done, regardless of his intentions. Even then, he said, hoping it was true. They had breakfast in companionable silence, cereal and orange juice, and the morning cartoons Sophie liked. Normal things, safe things. Marcus found himself cataloging these ordinary moments, filing them away in case they became scarce. At noon, he called his supervisor and told him he wouldn't be in that day. Personal emergency. Doug, his foreman, didn't ask questions, but Marcus could hear the concern in his voice. "Everything okay, Chen? You've seemed off lately." "Just need a day. Take the time you need. But Marcus, if something's going on, we got resources." Employee assistance, that kind of thing. Marcus almost laughed. Employee assistance for accidentally encountering the woman who killed your son while defending a waitress from a man you might have given brain damage. He was pretty sure that wasn't in any manual. Thanks, Doug. I'll be back tomorrow. But would he? If charges were filed? If he got arrested? If Sophie had to go into the system while they sorted everything out? He pushed the thought away and focused on getting ready. The Mountain View Diner sat on a busy stretch of Colfax Avenue, wedged between a pawn shop and a used car lot. It was smaller than the place where everything had gone wrong the night before, with red vinyl booths and a counter that had seen better decades. The kind of place where you could get eggs and hash browns for $4.99 and nobody cared if you lingered over your coffee for an hour. Marcus arrived at 1:45 and took a booth near the window where he could watch for Sarah's Honda Civic. The lunch rush was winding down, and the diner had that comfortable, tired feeling of a place where people came to think rather than talk. He ordered coffee from a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Reagan administration, and tried not to think about what he was going to say to Sarah Martinez when she brought his daughter's backpack. At exactly 2 p.m., she emerged from the kitchen, untying her apron and scanning the dining room until she spotted him. She'd traded her Navy uniform from the night before for jeans and a faded t-shirt, and she looked younger somehow, less official, more like the woman he vaguely remembered from 5 years ago, before grief had carved lines around her eyes. She slid into the booth across from him, setting Sophie's purple backpack on the table between them like evidence. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know." She signaled the older waitress for coffee, and they sat in silence until it arrived. Outside, traffic crawled along Colfax in the afternoon heat, and Marcus found himself thinking about all the other conversations happening in all the other diners across the city. People making plans, ending relationships, sharing secrets, normal human interactions that didn't carry the weight of accidental death and 5 years of mutual haunting. "How's your hand?" Sarah asked, nodding toward his knuckles. Marcus looked down. His right hand was swollen, bruised purple across the knuckles, where he'd connected with Richard Kessler's jaw. "It'll heal. You should ice it. I should do a lot of things." Sarah wrapped her fingers around her coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "I called the hospital this morning to check on him." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "And?" "Concussion. 12 stitches. They're keeping him overnight for observation, but he'll be fine." She paused. His wife came. She seemed relieved, actually. Relieved? Like maybe she wasn't surprised this happened. Like maybe Richard Kessler has a habit of picking fights he can't finish. Marcus should have felt better knowing the man would recover, but instead, he felt hollow. Violence was violence, regardless of who deserved it. "Does that make you feel better?" Sarah asked quietly. "Knowing he had it coming?" "No. Me neither." They drank their coffee and watched traffic and didn't talk about the obvious thing hanging between them until Sarah finally broke the silence. "I need to tell you something about that day." "About the accident." Marcus's hand clenched involuntarily around his cup. "I don't want to hear it. I was texting." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What?" "When I ran the stop sign, I wasn't just careless or distracted by the radio or eating or any of the things I told the police. I was texting my ex-husband about custody arrangements for Lily, that's my daughter. He was threatening to take her to California, and I was trying to negotiate with him, and I." She stopped, her voice breaking. "I was so focused on not losing my daughter that I killed your son." Marcus set his coffee cup down with deliberate care. The ceramic made a soft click against the saucer, and he focused on that sound instead of the rage building in his chest. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because last night, watching you with Sophie, I realized something. You're a good father. You made one mistake in a moment of anger, just like I did. But the difference is, your mistake might cost you your relationship with your daughter. Mine cost you your son. That's not the same thing, isn't it? We both let our emotions override our judgment." We both put the people we love at risk because we couldn't control ourselves in a crucial moment. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he'd never noticed before. The guilt wasn't just about Tommy. It was about her own daughter, her own failures, her own pattern of choices that had left her alone and working breakfast shifts in a diner on Colfax Avenue. "Where's Lily now?" he asked. "San Diego, with her father and his new wife. They have a house with a yard and a dog, and all the stability I couldn't provide after I got back from Afghanistan." Sarah's smile was brittle. "Turns out, PTSD and survivor's guilt make you terrible at custody hearings. How old is she?" 11 now. She was 6 when I lost her." Sophie's age. The parallel was too obvious to ignore. Both of them had lost their children. Both of them were sitting in a diner at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, drinking coffee and carrying the weight of irreversible mistakes. "Do you see her?" "Summers. 2 weeks, if I can prove I'm stable. Last year I couldn't prove it, so." Sarah shrugged, but Marcus could see the pain behind the casual gesture. "This year I was going to try again. Had 6 months clean from the pills, steady job, regular therapy appointments. Then, last night happened. Last night wasn't your fault." "No, but I was there. I'm always there when things go wrong. It's like I'm cursed to be adjacent to other people's disasters." Marcus thought about that, about coincidence and destiny, and the ways broken people found each other in a city of 500,000 strangers. "Why did you really offer to take Sophie home last night?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, tracing patterns in the condensation on her water glass. "Because I saw the way she looked at you after you hit that man. The same way Lily looked at me the last time we had a custody visit. Like she was scared of who I'd become." Sarah met his eyes. "I thought maybe if I could help her, just for an hour, it might balance the scales somehow." "The scales don't balance," Marcus said. "Trust me, I've tried." "I know, but we keep trying anyway, don't we?" Outside, a city bus wheezed to a stop, disgorging passengers into the afternoon heat. An elderly man with a walker. A young woman with a crying baby. A teenager with a backpack that looked exactly like Sophie's. People living their lives, carrying their own invisible weights. "I've been thinking about what Sophie said," Marcus continued. "About angry people being sad people who don't know how to ask for help. Smart kid. Too smart. She's been taking care of me instead of the other way around. Kids do that when the adults in their lives are drowning. They become little lifeguards." Marcus looked at Sophie's backpack, at the Disney princess patches, and the faded marker stains from art projects. Evidence of a normal childhood that was slipping away from her one bad decision at a time. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "Maybe you can't fix it. Maybe you just have to live with it and try to do better." "Is that what you're doing? Living with it?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I'm trying. Some days are better than others. Today." She gestured around the diner, at the space between them where 5 years of grief had settled. "Today, I'm not sure if this is better or worse." "Worse," Marcus said without hesitation. "Definitely worse." Sarah laughed, and it was the first genuine sound he'd heard from her. Not happy, exactly, but real. "Yeah, worse." They sat with that acknowledgement for a while. Sometimes the truth wasn't comforting, but it was still the truth. "I should go," Sarah said finally. "Sophie's probably wondering where her backpack island." She started to slide out of the booth, then stopped. "Marcus? That man last night, Richard Kessler, he reminded me of my ex-husband. The way he talked to that waitress, the casual cruelty of it. And watching you stand up to him." She shook her head. "I never had anyone stand up for me like that. Not once in my whole marriage. It was the wrong thing to do. Maybe. But it was also brave. Brave people don't end up in diners explaining their mistakes to the families of their victims. Don't they?" Sarah stood up, slinging her purse over her shoulder. "Because that's exactly where we both are." She left money on the table for her coffee and headed toward the door. Halfway there, she turned back. "For what it's worth, I think you're a better father than you know. Sophie's lucky to have you. Even after what she saw last night? Especially after what she saw last night. She saw you make a mistake and take responsibility for it. She saw you care enough about a stranger to risk everything. Kids learn more from watching us handle our failures than our successes. Sarah Martinez walked out of the Mountain View Diner and out of Marcus's life for the second time in 5 years. This time, he didn't watch her car drive away. Instead, he sat in the booth for another hour, staring at Sophie's backpack and thinking about courage and responsibility and the impossible weight of loving someone more than your own comfort. When he finally left, the older waitress stopped him at the register. "You okay, hun? You look like you seen a ghost." Marcus paid for his coffee and looked out at Colfax Avenue, at all the people going about their ordinary Wednesday afternoons. "Something like that," he said. He drove home with Sophie's backpack in the passenger seat, thinking about second chances and whether they were earned or given, and what the difference might mean for a man trying to be better than his worst moment. Sophie was waiting for him in the apartment complex parking lot, sitting on the curb with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, the same Mrs. Patterson she'd mentioned the night before, the one whose anger made the walls feel thin. "Daddy!" Sophie jumped up and ran to him. Mrs. Patterson made cookies. Mrs. Patterson approached more slowly. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd lived in the complex longer than anyone, and had never spoken more than 2 words to Marcus in the 4 months they'd been neighbors. "Your daughter was worried about you," she said without preamble. "Said you went to get her backpack but didn't say when you'd be home." Marcus looked at Sophie, who was clutching a plate of chocolate chip cookies and trying not to look guilty. "I got scared," Sophie admitted. "After last night, I thought maybe you wouldn't come back." The words were like a punch to the chest. His 8-year-old daughter was already learning to expect abandonment, already bracing for the worst-case scenario. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, kneeling down to her level. "I should have called. Mrs. Patterson says her husband used to disappear for hours when he was upset, but he always came back. She says men sometimes need to drive around when their feelings are too big for their bodies." Marcus looked up at Mrs. Patterson. This neighbor he'd assumed was just a cranky old woman who complained about noise and parking spaces. "That's surprisingly insightful," he said. Mrs. Patterson shrugged. 43 years of marriage teaches you things. Plus, I've been watching you too through my kitchen window. That little girl worries about you more than any child should have to." The observation stung because it was true. Sophie had become his caretaker, his emotional barometer, his reason to keep going when everything else felt pointless. "I'm working on it," Marcus said. "Good. She needs you to be the parent so she can be the kid." Mrs. Patterson turned to head back to her apartment, then paused. "Whatever happened last night, and I heard the sirens, saw the police cars, it doesn't define you unless you let it. Your daughter sees who you really are, not just your worst moment." She disappeared into her apartment, leaving Marcus and Sophie alone in the parking lot, with a plate of cookies and the weight of unexpected wisdom from an unlikely source. "She's not as angry as I thought," Sophie said, offering him a cookie. "No, she's not." They climbed the stairs to their apartment, and Marcus realized that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it was a waitress brave enough to serve difficult customers. Sometimes it was a neighbor who noticed when a child was carrying too much worry. Sometimes it was even the woman whose mistake had shattered your world, showing up at exactly the moment when you needed to remember that broken people could still choose to help each other. That night, Marcus helped Sophie with her homework at the kitchen table while she told him about her day at school. Normal things. Safe things. The arithmetic of childhood that had nothing to do with adult complications. When she was in bed, he sat on the couch and looked at his phone. Sarah Martinez's number was still in his recent messages, and he found himself typing and deleting responses he would never send. Finally, he settled on something simple. "Thank you." Her response came an hour later. For what? Marcus stared at the question for a long time before typing back. For reminding me that we're all just trying to do better than yesterday. Are we doing better? Marcus looked around his small apartment, at Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator, and the photo albums still scattered on the coffee table from the night before. At the life he'd built from the wreckage of the worst day he'd ever lived through. I don't know, he typed. But we're still trying. Yeah, came the response. We are. Marcus turned off his phone and went to check on Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully in her bed, surrounded by stuffed animals, and the kind of dreams 8-year-olds had when they felt safe enough to stop worrying about the adults in their lives. Tomorrow, there would be consequences. Phone calls from lawyers, maybe charges filed. Definitely conversations with Sophie about violence and anger and the difference between standing up and acting out. But tonight, his daughter was sleeping soundly, and somewhere across the city, Sarah Martinez was probably lying awake, thinking about her own daughter and her own mistakes and the impossible arithmetic of redemption. They were all just trying to do better than yesterday. Sometimes that was enough. The call came at 6:47 a.m., while Marcus was making Sophie's lunch for school. Mr. Chen, this is Detective Ramirez with Denver PD. We need you to come in for questioning regarding the incident at Romano's Diner. Marcus set down the peanut butter and jelly sandwich he'd been wrapping. Sophie was in the bathroom brushing her teeth, humming the same song she'd hummed every morning since Elena left a Disney tune that had become the soundtrack to their new normal. Am I being arrested? Not at this time. Mr. Kessler has decided to press charges for assault. We need your statement on record. Marcus closed his eyes. He'd known this was coming, had spent the sleepless hours before dawn preparing for it. But hearing the words still felt like a door slamming shut on whatever fragile stability he and Sophie had managed to build. When? This morning. Can you be here by 9? I have to get my daughter to school first. Of course. Ask for me at the front desk when you arrive. The line went dead, and Marcus stood in his kitchen holding a half-made sandwich, listening to Sophie's off-key singing and trying to figure out how to explain to an 8-year-old that her father might not be coming home that night. Sophie emerged from the bathroom with toothpaste on her pajama top and her hair sticking up at impossible angles. Is that my lunch? She asked, pointing at the sandwich. Yeah. Almost ready. She studied his face with the attention she'd learned to pay to adult expressions. You look scared. Marcus finished wrapping the sandwich, buying himself time to find the right words. How did you tell a child that the world was about to tilt sideways again? That the fragile safety you'd built around her might collapse because you couldn't control your temper for 60 seconds? Sophie, I need to go talk to some people today. About what happened the other night. The police people? Yes. Sophie climbed onto a kitchen chair and watched him pack her lunchbox. Apple slices, string cheese, the sandwich cut into triangles the way she liked. Normal things that might be the last normal things he did for her for a while. Are you going to jail? The question was asked with the same casual tone she might use to ask about the weather, but Marcus could see the tension in her small shoulders. I don't know. Maybe. For how long? I don't know that either. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the grim pragmatism of a child who'd already learned that adults weren't reliable narrators of their own lives. Can I stay with Mrs. Patterson? The request hit Marcus harder than the detective's phone call had. His daughter was already making contingency plans, already preparing for him to disappear from her life the way Elena had. If I have to go away for a while, we'll figure something out. Maybe your mom. Mom doesn't want me. Sophie's voice was matter-of-fact, devastating in its simplicity. She wants to figure herself out first. That's what she told Aunt Lisa on the phone. Marcus knelt down beside Sophie's chair, taking her small hands in his bruised ones. Sweetheart, that's not, it's okay, Daddy. I heard her. She said having a kid makes it hard to know who you are when you're not being somebody's mommy. Sophie shrugged, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I understand. Sometimes I don't know who I am when I'm not taking care of you." The words were like glass in Marcus's chest. His 8-year-old daughter had become so accustomed to emotional responsibility that she was making excuses for the adults who kept failing her. "Sophie, you shouldn't have to take care of me. That's not your job." "I know, but I'm good at it." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, and trying not to think about how this might be one of the last times he got to comfort his daughter before the state stepped in to protect her from him. "What if I don't come home today?" he asked quietly. "Then I'll be sad, but I'll be okay. Mrs. Patterson has cookies, and she knows how to braid hair. And Sarah gave me her phone number, in case I ever needed a grown-up who understands about daddies who make mistakes." Marcus pulled back to look at his daughter. "When did she give you her phone number?" "Yesterday, when she brought my backpack. She said sometimes kids need someone to talk to who isn't their parent." Sophie wiped her nose on her pajama sleeve. "She said her little girl used to call her when things got scary at her daddy's house." Of course Sarah had thought of that. Of course she'd anticipated this moment and tried to build a safety net for Sophie that Marcus himself hadn't considered. "You like her," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question. She makes grilled cheese the right way. And she listens when I talk instead of just waiting for me to stop talking so she can say something." Sophie paused. "Plus, she's sad like you. But she doesn't try to pretend she's not sad." Marcus thought about Sarah Martinez, about her steady hands in the chaos of the restaurant, about the way she'd cared for Sophie without making it seem like an obligation, about the conversation in the diner where she'd acknowledged their shared brokenness without trying to fix anything. "I need to get you to school," he said. "Can we walk instead of driving? I want to see the flowers in Mrs. Chen's garden one more time." The request was small, but loaded with meaning. Sophie wanted to stretch out their morning, to create one more memory, before uncertainty swallowed their routine. They walked the 6 blocks to Sophie's elementary school in comfortable silence, her small hand tucked into his larger one. She pointed out things she'd never mentioned before. A cat that sat in the same window every morning. A house with wind chimes that played different songs depending on the weather. A tree where someone had carved initials inside a heart. "I notice things more when I think they might change," she explained, when Marcus commented on her sudden attention to detail. At the school gate, she hugged him tighter than usual. "Daddy? Yeah? Even if you have to go away, you're still my dad, right? That doesn't change?" Marcus felt his throat close up. "That never changes, sweetheart. No matter what happens, no matter where I am, I'm always your dad. Promise?" "Promise." Sophie released him and walked toward the school building, with her backpack bouncing and her head held high. She didn't look back, and Marcus recognized the survival instinct in that choice. She was protecting herself from a goodbye that might be permanent. The Denver Police Department occupied a squat concrete building downtown that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never experienced joy. Marcus sat in Detective Ramirez's office, answering questions about the incident at Romano's diner while trying not to think about Sophie sitting in her 3rd-grade classroom, learning long division, and probably wondering if her father was already in handcuffs. "Mr. Kessler claims you attacked him without provocation," Detective Ramirez said. She was a small woman, with graying hair, and the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd heard every possible variation of human stupidity. "Says he was just having a conversation with the waitress when you assaulted him. That's not what happened." "Then tell me what did happen." Marcus told the story from the beginning, Richard. Kessler's increasingly hostile behavior, the waitress's obvious distress, the escalation that had ended with blood on the diner floor. Detective Ramirez took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, her expression giving nothing away. "Multiple witnesses corroborate your version of events," she said finally. "Mr. Kessler was being verbally abusive to the staff. However, verbal abuse isn't grounds for physical assault." "I know. Do you?" "Because your record shows This isn't the first time you've solved problems with your fists. Marcus's jaw tightened. That was 5 years ago. Different circumstances. Hospital waiting room. You assaulted a man who made inappropriate comments about car accidents while your son was in surgery. The memory hit Marcus like a slap that terrible night, waiting to hear if Tommy would survive, listening to some drunk idiot make jokes about fender benders until something inside Marcus had snapped completely. That man was making fun of children dying in car crashes while my 3-year-old son was fighting for his life. I'd do it again. And 2 nights ago? Would you do that again too? Marcus thought about Sophie's question in the diner. How was this different? When was violence justified? And when was it just an excuse for rage? I don't know, he said honestly. I hope I never have to find out. Detective Ramirez set down her pen and studied Marcus with the kind of attention cops developed for reading people's intentions. You have a daughter, she said. Yes. 8 years old. Mother's out of the picture. Temporarily. Mr. Chen, I'm going to be straight with you. Richard Kessler is a piece of work. Rich, entitled, History of Treating Service Workers Like Garbage. Half the restaurants in downtown Denver have stories about him. But he's also well-connected, and he wants to make an example of you. Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily. What does that mean? It means he's pushing for felony assault charges. With your prior record, you're looking at potential jail time. Detective Ramirez leaned back in her chair. However, the DA's office is aware of the circumstances. The waitress, Michaela Santos, has filed a complaint about Mr. Kessler's behavior. Other diners have come forward with statements supporting your version of events. And sometimes, justice looks like compromise instead of punishment. She slid a document across the desk. Mr. Kessler's attorney has proposed a plea agreement. Assault in the 3rd degree, reduced to a misdemeanor. 6 months probation, anger management classes, community service. No jail time. Marcus stared at the papers without reading them. 6 months of check-ins with a probation officer. Court-ordered therapy. Community service that would take time away from Sophie. But he'd go home tonight. He'd be there when Sophie got off the school bus. He'd make her dinner and help with homework and read bedtime stories for 6 more months before anything else could go wrong. What happens if I don't take the plea? Trial. Felony charges. If convicted, you're looking at 2 to 6 years. Your daughter goes into foster care while you fight it. And even if you win, the legal bills will destroy you financially. There was no real choice. There never had been. I need to call someone, Marcus said, to pick up my daughter from school if this takes longer than expected. You have someone. Marcus thought about Mrs. Patterson, about her kitchen window, and her unexpected wisdom, and her offer to braid Sophie's hair. But Mrs. Patterson was 70-something, and barely knew them. He thought about Elena, 3 states away, and figuring herself out. He thought about Sarah Martinez, carrying her own guilt, and working breakfast shifts, and somehow still finding the strength to care about a little girl who wasn't her responsibility. Yeah, he said, pulling out his phone. I have someone. Sarah answered on the 2nd ring. Marcus? Is everything okay? Not really. I'm at the police station. Sophie's at school. But if this runs late, she'll need someone to pick her up. I know it's a lot to ask. What time does she get out? 3:15. But Sarah, you don't have to. Text me the school address. I get off work at 2:30. I'll be there. Are you sure? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus, 5 years ago I took something irreplaceable from your family. I can't give it back, but I can make sure Sophie doesn't spend an afternoon wondering if her father abandoned her too. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been tight since Elena walked out. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just take care of yourself in there. Sophie needs you to come home. The call ended, and Detective Ramirez was watching him with something that might have been approval. Good friend? She asked. Complicated friend. the best kind. Marcus signed the plea agreement at 2:47 p.m., officially becoming a convicted criminal, with a misdemeanor assault charge on his record. The probation officer would call within a week to set up his first appointment. Anger management classes started the following Monday. He drove straight to Sophie's school, arriving just as the afternoon buses were loading. Sarah's Honda Civic was already in the pickup line, and through the windshield, he could see her scanning the crowd of children for a little girl with dark hair and a purple backpack. Sophie spotted him first, breaking away from the line of students and running across the parking lot with her backpack bouncing behind her. "Daddy! You came back!" The relief in her voice was heartbreaking. Marcus caught her in his arms and held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering smell of school cafeteria food. "I promised I would." "I know. But promises are hard to keep sometimes." Over Sophie's shoulder, Marcus could see Sarah getting out of her car, uncertainty written across her face. She'd kept her word, had been prepared to step in and care for his daughter, but now she wasn't sure if her presence was welcome or necessary. "Sophie," Marcus said gently, "Sarah was going to pick you up if I was late." Sophie turned in his arms to wave at Sarah, who approached them with the careful steps of someone walking on uncertain ground. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked. "Yeah. All settled." Marcus looked at this woman who'd destroyed his life and somehow kept showing up to help put it back together. "Thank you for being willing to be here. She's a good kid. Deserves people who show up for her." Sophie was looking between them, with the sharp attention children paid when adults were having conversations with hidden meanings. "Are you friends now?" she asked. Marcus and Sarah looked at each other over the head of his daughter, two broken people standing in an elementary school parking lot, connected by tragedy, and held together by the shared understanding that some mistakes could never be undone, only lived with. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "Maybe we're something else." "What's something else?" Sarah knelt down to Sophie's level, her voice gentle. "Sometimes, grown-ups hurt each other by accident, and they can never go back to being the way they were before, but they can choose to help each other anyway, even when it's hard." Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all of life's complex questions. "Like how you help me even though it makes Daddy sad to see you." Sarah's breath caught. "Yes, like that. And like how Daddy helped the mean man's feelings even though it got him in trouble." Marcus almost smiled. Trust Sophie to find the thread of logic that connected disparate acts of questionable judgment. "Something like that." Sophie nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation of adult complexity. "Can Sarah come have dinner with us? I want to show her my drawings." Marcus looked at Sarah, who was studying the parking lot asphalt like it contained secrets of the universe. "I should probably go," Sarah said quietly. "Please?" Sophie's voice carried the particular pleading tone that had never failed to work on Marcus. "I made a drawing of all of us at the restaurant, and I want you to see it." Sarah's eyes met Marcus's over Sophie's head. In them, he saw the same question that had been haunting him for 2 days. Was it possible to build something functional from the wreckage of something terrible? Could two people connected by the worst moment of their lives find a way to be in the same room without destroying each other? "Okay," Sarah said finally. "But just for dinner." They drove home in separate cars, Sophie chattering about her day from the back seat, while Marcus tried to process the surreal reality of inviting Sarah Martinez to share a meal in his apartment. But Sophie seemed lighter somehow, more like the carefree child she'd been before Elena left, and if having Sarah around accomplished that, then maybe the discomfort was worth it. Sarah arrived 20 minutes after they did, carrying a bottle of wine, and wearing the same uncertain expression she'd had at the school. "I didn't know what to bring," she said, holding up the bottle. This seemed more appropriate than flowers. "Wine's good," Marcus said, accepting the bottle and trying not to think about the last time he'd shared wine with someone who wasn't Elena. Sophie had spread her drawings across the living room floor, a rainbow of construction paper and crayon. Masterpieces that documented her 8 years of life. She pulled Sarah down to sit beside her, launching into detailed explanations of each piece. This one is our old house, before Mommy left. See? There's Mommy's garden and Daddy's workshop and my swing set. Sophie held up a drawing rendered in cheerful primary colors that bore no resemblance to the reality. Marcus remembered a house where he and Elena had fought in whispers while their marriage slowly died. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, and her voice suggested she meant it. "You're a very good artist. This one's our apartment now." Sophie's second drawing was noticeably smaller, done in darker colors, with only 2 stick figures in the frame. "It's not as happy, but Daddy says sometimes you have to start over in smaller places." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Through a child's art, his life looked exactly as pathetic as it probably was. A grown man starting over in a 2-bedroom apartment, with furniture from Goodwill, and a daughter who'd learned to manage his emotions better than he managed them himself. "Starting over takes courage," Sarah said quietly. "Some people never try." "Did you start over too?" Sarah glanced at Marcus, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Yes. I had to leave my little girl and start over somewhere new. It was very hard." "Do you miss her?" "Every day." Sophie studied Sarah's face with the intense attention she usually reserved for trying to understand homework problems. "Is that why you're sad like Daddy?" "Yes, that's part of it." Sophie nodded solemnly, then pulled out another drawing. "This one's from the restaurant." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The drawing showed the interior of Romano's diner, recognizable by the red booths and black and white checkered floor. But instead of the chaos and violence he remembered, Sophie had drawn all the adults standing in a circle, holding hands. Even the figure that was clearly Richard Kessler, identifiable by his suit and frown, was connected to the others. "Everyone was scared," Sophie explained, "but they were holding hands so nobody had to be scared alone." Sarah stared at the drawing for a long moment, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. That's a beautiful way to see it, Sophie. Sometimes when things are scary, I draw them the way I wish they were, instead of the way they actually were. Daddy says that's called hope." Marcus looked at his daughter, at this small person who'd witnessed violence and abandonment and adult failure but still chose to imagine connection instead of chaos, and felt something shift inside his chest. Maybe hope wasn't naive. Maybe it was the most sophisticated response possible to a world that rarely made sense. "Should we make dinner?" he asked, needing to move before the emotion in the room became too heavy to carry. They cooked together in his small kitchen spaghetti, with meat sauce, garlic bread, a salad that Sophie helped prepare by tearing lettuce into precise, tiny pieces. Normal domestic tasks that felt surreal given the circumstances. Sarah moved around the space with careful efficiency, clearly trying not to intrude, but naturally falling into the rhythm of meal preparation. "You're good at this," Marcus observed, watching her stir the sauce with the kind of attention that suggested she actually enjoyed cooking. "Lily and I used to cook together every Sunday. It was our thing." Sarah's voice was carefully neutral, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath. "She's probably a better cook than me by now. When do you see her next?" "I don't know. Her father's lawyer says I need 6 months of demonstrated stability before they'll consider a visit. Clean drug screens, steady employment, no legal troubles." Sarah glanced at Marcus. "Yesterday I had all of that. Today, I'm not sure." Marcus felt guilt settle in his stomach like a stone. "Sarah, what happened at the restaurant? Wasn't your fault. I chose to get involved. I chose to help with Sophie. Those were my decisions. But if it affects your custody, then I'll deal with it. Some things are more important than following the rules perfectly." During dinner, Sophie kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Sarah about being a soldier, about living in different cities, about whether she liked dogs or cats better. Normal 8-year-old questions that slowly chipped away at the artificial politeness between the adults. "Do you have nightmares?" Sophie asked suddenly, pausing mid-bite of spaghetti. Sarah set down her fork. "Sometimes. Do you?" About mommy not coming back. And about daddy getting so sad, he forgets how to take care of himself. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Sophie, you don't have to worry about taking care of me. But I do worry. And Sarah worries about her little girl, and you worry about both of us. Grown-ups worry a lot. That's true, Sarah said. What do you do when you're worried? I count things. Or I draw pictures that are better than real life. Or I ask Mrs. Patterson to teach me how to knit, because it keeps my hands busy. Sophie twirled spaghetti around her fork with impressive dexterity. What do you do? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I used to take pills that made the worrying stop. But they also made everything else stop. So now I try to help other people instead. Does that work? Sometimes. Like tonight cooking dinner with you and your dad, seeing your drawings. I'm not worrying right now. Sophie beamed at this information. See, Daddy? Sarah feels better when she helps us. And we feel better when she helps us. That's called being good for each other. Marcus looked across the table at Sarah, at this woman who'd accidentally destroyed his family, and was now somehow helping to heal what remained of it. The math of it made no sense. But Sophie was right. The three of them together felt more stable than any of them did alone. After dinner, Sophie insisted on showing Sarah how to play her favorite card game, a complicated hybrid of Go Fish and War that she'd invented and modified according to rules that seemed to change mid-game. They sat on the living room floor, the coffee table covered with cards and Sophie's art supplies, while evening settled outside the apartment windows. Sarah? Sophie asked during a particularly confusing round, where she'd apparently decided jacks were wild, but only on Wednesdays. Yeah? If you could draw your little girl a picture that was better than real life, what would you draw? Sarah's hand stilled over her cards. What do you mean? Like I drew the restaurant with everyone holding hands instead of being scared. If you could draw a picture of you and Lily that was better than how it really is, what would it look like? Marcus watched Sarah's face cycle through pain, hope, and something that might have been recognition. I would draw us in a kitchen, Sarah said finally. Making Sunday dinner together. And we'd both be laughing about something, and she'd be telling me about school, and her friends, and I'd be telling her how proud I am of the person she's becoming. That sounds nice. It is nice. In the drawing. Sophie nodded sagely. Sometimes the drawing is practice for when real life gets better. Is that what you think? That real life gets better? Sophie looked around the small apartment, at her father who was still learning how to be okay, at the woman who'd brought wine and helped make dinner, and was asking questions like she actually cared about the answers. It's getting better right now, she said simply. Sarah looked at Marcus over Sophie's head, and he saw his own confusion reflected in her eyes. This shouldn't work. A victim's father and the person who caused his loss, sitting around playing cards and talking about hope. It defied logic, and probably several principles of healthy grieving. But Sophie was laughing at her own card game rules, and Sarah was smiling genuinely for the first time since he'd known her, and Marcus felt something he'd forgotten was possible. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, but the absence of active pain. A moment of peace in a life that had contained precious little peace lately. I should probably go, Sarah said when Sophie finally tired of the card game and started yawning. It's getting late. Will you come back? Sophie asked. The question loaded with the particular hopefulness of children who'd learned to expect disappointment, but hadn't given up wanting better. Sarah looked at Marcus, clearly leaving the decision to him. Do you want to come back? He asked. Yes, but I don't know if that's a good idea. Maybe good ideas are overrated, Marcus said, surprising himself. Maybe sometimes you just do what feels right, and figure out the consequences later. Sarah stood up, gathering her purse and the empty wine bottle. Is that what you're doing? What feels right? Marcus looked at his daughter, who was arranging her drawings in careful piles, humming that same Disney song she'd been humming for months. But tonight, it sounded less like a desperate attempt at normalcy, and more like actual contentment. Yeah, he said. I think at Island Sarah left with promises to call soon, To maybe help Sophie with a cooking project over the weekend, if Marcus didn't mind. To be there if they needed anything. Normal offers from a normal friend. As if the foundation of their relationship wasn't built on tragedy and guilt, and 5 years of mutual haunting. Later, after Sophie was in bed, and Marcus was cleaning up the dinner dishes, he found himself thinking about her drawing of the restaurant. All those frightened people, choosing to hold hands, instead of standing apart, in their individual fear. Maybe that's what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the decision to face it together instead of alone. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Thank you for dinner. Sophie is amazing." Marcus typed back. "Thank you for showing up. For all of it. We're still trying to do better than yesterday?" Marcus looked around his small apartment, at Sophie's drawings still scattered on the coffee table, at the evidence of an evening that had felt surprisingly normal, despite its impossible circumstances. "Yeah," he texted back. "We're still trying." Outside, the city hummed with its usual nighttime sounds, traffic and sirens, and the distant laughter of people living their regular lives. But inside apartment 2B, a single father and his daughter were both sleeping more peacefully than they had in months, held safe by the unexpected discovery that sometimes the people who hurt you most are also the people best positioned to understand your pain. And across town, a former army medic was lying awake, thinking about Sunday dinners and second chances, and the radical possibility that forgiveness might be something you could practice. Like any other skill, imperfectly, gradually, one small choice at a time. 6 weeks later, Marcus sat in a circle of plastic chairs in the basement of a community center, listening to a man named Gary explain how road rage had cost him his marriage and his relationship with his teenage sons. "The thing about anger," Gary was saying, his voice hoarse from too many cigarettes, "is it feels righteous when you're in it. Feels like justice. But afterward, when you're sitting in your empty house wondering why everyone you love is afraid of you, it just feels like stupidity." The anger management group met every Thursday evening at 7. 12 men and 3 women, all court-ordered, all carrying the particular shame that came with admitting you'd let your worst impulses win. Marcus had been attending for 5 weeks now, and the stories had started to blend together: bar fights and domestic disputes, road rage incidents, and workplace violence. Different triggers. Same underlying theme: people who'd never learned how to carry their pain without spreading it to others. Marcus? Dr. Reyes, the group facilitator, turned her attention to him. "You've been quiet tonight. How was your week?" Marcus shifted in his plastic chair, feeling the familiar discomfort of being the center of attention. "Better. Good, actually." What made it good? He thought about the week Sophie's parent-teacher conference, where her teacher had praised her improvement in class. A successful probation check-in, where Officer Martinez, no relation to Sarah, despite the name coincidence that had made Marcus's stomach drop, had noted his compliance with all terms of his agreement. But mostly, he thought about Saturday afternoon, when Sarah had come over to help Sophie make chocolate chip cookies and had stayed for dinner without anyone feeling like they needed to explain why. "My daughter's doing better. She seems happier." "And how does that make you feel?" "Relieved. Like maybe I haven't completely ruined her childhood." A few members of the group nodded in recognition. They'd all heard variations of this concern, the particular terror that came with realizing your actions had impacted the people who depended on you most. What's different about your daughter's situation now, compared to 6 weeks ago? Marcus considered how to answer this. How did you explain to a room full of strangers that the woman who'd killed your son had somehow become one of your closest friends? That she was better at helping your daughter with homework than you were? That she showed up to school events when your ex-wife couldn't be bothered to return phone calls? That she'd become part of your family through a combination of guilt, coincidence, and Sophie's stubborn insistence that people could choose to be good for each other? "She has more support," he said finally. "More adults who care about her." "That's important," Dr. Reyes said. Children need to see that their parents have healthy relationships with other adults. It helps them feel secure. Marcus almost laughed at the word healthy. There was nothing healthy about his relationship with Sarah Martinez by any conventional definition. But Sophie was sleeping through the night for the first time since Elena left, had stopped asking when her mother was coming home, and yesterday had told him she loved him, without the careful hesitation that had crept into her voice over the past months. If that wasn't healthy, it was at least functional. After group, Marcus drove through downtown Denver toward home, taking the long way past Sarah's apartment complex. It had become a habit not stopping, just driving past to see if her lights were on, if her car was in its assigned space. A wellness check on the person who'd become his daughter's unofficial second parent, and his own most complicated friendship. Tonight, her windows were dark, but her Honda Civic was in its spot. She was probably asleep, getting rest before another breakfast shift at the Mountain View Diner. Sarah worked too much, slept too little, and carried herself with the careful exhaustion of someone perpetually trying to prove she deserved to exist in the world. Marcus's phone rang as he was pulling into his own parking lot. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was small through the car speakers. "Can you come inside? I had a bad dream." "Of course, sweetheart. I'm just parking. Be right up." He found Sophie sitting on the couch in her dinosaur pajamas, clutching the stuffed elephant Elena had bought her for her 6th birthday. Mrs. Patterson sat beside her, wearing a bathrobe and slippers, her silver hair in curlers. "Hope you don't mind," Mrs. Patterson said, as Marcus entered. "She knocked on my door." Bad dream about her mother. Marcus knelt in front of Sophie, brushing hair out of her face. "What happened in the dream, kiddo?" "Mom came back, but she didn't remember me. She looked right at me and asked who I was." Sophie's eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. She'd already done her crying with Mrs. Patterson. "In the dream, you tried to explain that I was her daughter, but she just shook her head and said she didn't have children." The cruelty of children's subconscious minds never ceased to amaze Marcus. Sophie's 8-year-old brain had managed to conjure a scenario more devastating than simple abandonment, the complete erasure of her existence from her mother's memory. "That was just a dream, Soph. Mom remembers you. She loves you, even if she's figuring some things out right now." "I know, but it felt real." Mrs. Patterson stood up, gathering her bathrobe around herself. Dreams can feel more real than reality sometimes, but that's also what makes the good dreams so powerful. Sophie looked up at her neighbor with curious attention. "What do you mean?" "Well, if bad dreams can feel real enough to wake you up scared, then good dreams can feel real enough to give you hope. The trick is learning to tell the difference." After Mrs. Patterson left, Marcus made hot chocolate the real kind, with milk and actual chocolate chips melted slowly on the stove, and sat with Sophie on the couch while she told him about her day at school. Normal things. Safe things. The particular comfort of bedtime conversations when the rest of the world had gone quiet. "Daddy?" "Yeah? Do you think Mom will ever come back?" It was the question Sophie hadn't asked in weeks, and Marcus found himself grateful for the temporary reprieve from having to navigate this particular minefield. "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so. But even if she doesn't, we're okay. We have each other, and we have people who care about us." "Like Sarah?" "Like Sarah. And Mrs. Patterson?" "And Mrs. Patterson." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this inventory of their support system. "That's more than we had before." Before. When their family had been intact on paper, but dissolving in practice. When Marcus and Elena had fought in whispers and pretended everything was fine while their marriage died incrementally. When Sophie had learned to read the emotional temperature of rooms and make herself smaller during the worst of it. "Yeah," Marcus said. "It island. I like it better this way. Even without Mom." The admission hit Marcus like a confession. His daughter preferred their broken, reconstructed family to the traditional intact version she'd lost. Preferred honesty about sadness to performance of happiness. Preferred adults who showed up imperfectly to adults who didn't show up at all. Me too, he said, surprising himself with the truth of it. Sophie fell asleep against his shoulder, her empty hot chocolate mug cradled in her lap. Marcus carried her to her bedroom, tucked her under her covers, and kissed her forehead like he'd done every night for 8 years. But tonight, the ritual felt different, less desperate, more peaceful. Like they were both finally learning how to be okay with the life they had, instead of mourning the life they'd lost. His phone buzzed with a text message as he was cleaning up the kitchen. "How was group tonight, Sarah?" She always asked about his Thursday evening sessions, not out of nosiness, but from the particular understanding of someone who'd done her own court-ordered therapy and knew how hard it was to sit in a circle and admit your failures to strangers. Better. Sophie had a nightmare about Elena, but we talked through it. "Is she okay?" "She's okay. Said she likes our family better now, even without her mom." There was a long pause before Sarah's response came through. Kids are resilient and honest. Sometimes brutally honest. Marcus poured himself a glass of water and sat at his kitchen table, looking out at the apartment complex parking lot. Most of the windows were dark now, families settling into their evening routines behind closed doors. Normal people living normal lives, dealing with normal problems that didn't require court supervision or anger management classes. "Can I ask you something?" he texted. "Of course. Do you ever feel guilty about being happy? Like, even small moments of happiness feel like betraying Tommy somehow?" The response took several minutes. "Every day. But Lily told me something once, before I lost custody. She said happiness isn't about forgetting the sad things. It's about believing good things can happen even when sad things have happened too." She was 6 when she said that? 5. Kids understand things we spend years trying to figure out. Marcus thought about Sophie's drawing of the restaurant, about her insistence that people could choose to be good for each other, about her matter-of-fact acceptance that grown-ups were complicated and family could be built from unlikely materials. "Sophie wants to know if you can come to her school play next Friday. They're doing a production of Charlotte's Web. She's playing Charlotte. She's the spider. She auditioned specifically for Charlotte. Said she wanted to play someone who saves her friends. I'd love to come, if you think it's okay." Marcus considered this. A school play. The kind of normal family event where parents gathered in uncomfortable folding chairs to watch their children recite memorized lines and sing off-key songs. The kind of event Elena should be attending but wouldn't. Where other parents would ask polite questions about Sophie's mother, and Marcus would have to navigate the social discomfort of single parenthood. But Sarah had been to Sophie's parent-teacher conferences, had helped with homework and cooked dinner, and braided hair, and listened to 8-year-old philosophical observations about the nature of adult relationships. She'd earned her place in the uncomfortable folding chair. "It's more than okay. Sophie will be thrilled." "Good. I'll ask for the evening off." Marcus set down his phone and looked around his small apartment. Sophie's drawings covered the refrigerator door. Her backpack sat by the front entrance, ready for tomorrow's school day. A library book she was reading lay open on the coffee table, marked with a bookmark. Sarah had bought her a laminated butterfly with Sophie, written in purple glitter. Evidence of a life being lived. Not the life he'd planned, not the life he'd thought he wanted, but a life that contained laughter and homework help and bedtime stories, and people who showed up when they said they would. His phone rang at 11:43 p.m., jerking him out of sleep. Elena's number on the caller ID. "Hello? Marcus?" Elena's voice was different, softer, uncertain. "I'm sorry to call so late. I know it's been a while." 3 months. It had been 3 months since she'd called. 2 months since she'd answered any of his messages about Sophie's school events, or doctor appointments, or the general logistics of co-parenting a child with someone who'd checked out of active parenthood. "Is everything okay?" I don't know. Maybe. I've been thinking about coming home, about trying to work things out." Marcus sat up in bed, instantly awake. The conversation he'd been both dreading and hoping for since Elena had left. "What changed?" "Lisa thinks I'm making a mistake. Says I'm running away from the best thing in my life because I'm scared of being trapped. Says Sophie needs her mother. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, not at Elena, but at her sister Lisa, who'd apparently decided after 3 months of silence that now was the time to guilt Elena into reconsidering abandonment. Sophie does need her mother. But she needs a mother who wants to be here, not one who's here out of obligation. I do want to be here. I think. It's just. Just what? I look at my friends with kids, and they all seem to know how to do this. How to be mothers and wives and still be themselves. And I never figured that out. I felt like I was disappearing. Marcus thought about Sarah, who'd lost her own daughter to similar struggles, about the particular burden placed on women to be everything to everyone, while somehow maintaining their individual identity, about the impossible mathematics of modern parenthood that seemed to demand self-erasure as proof of love. Elena, you don't have to disappear to be a good mother. You just have to show up consistently. Have you been showing up consistently? The question was loaded with 3 months of guilt and defensive positioning, but Marcus heard something else underneath it, genuine curiosity about whether he'd figured out what she couldn't. I've been trying. Some days are better than others. But I show up every day, even when I don't know what I'm doing. Are you seeing someone? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? Dating. Seeing someone. Sophie mentioned a woman named Sarah in our last conversation. Marcus felt his chest tighten. How did you explain Sarah Martinez to your estranged wife? How did you describe a relationship built on tragedy and sustained by mutual understanding of loss? Sarah Island. Marcus paused, searching for words. She's someone who helps with Sophie sometimes. A friend. A friend who comes to parent-teacher conferences? How did you? Sophie told me. She said Sarah knows how to make grilled cheese the right way and helps with math homework and isn't scared of her when she's sad. The description was accurate and devastating in its simplicity. Sarah provided the kind of steady, reliable presence Elena had been unable or unwilling to maintain. Sophie needs adults in her life who are consistent, Marcus said carefully. Sarah is consistent. And what am I? Marcus looked at the calendar on his nightstand, at the weeks marked with Sophie's school events and doctor appointments, and the general rhythm of single parenthood. Elena's name appeared nowhere on those marked days. You're Sophie's mother. That never changes. But you haven't been present. Elena was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. She's better off without me, isn't she? She's not better off without you. She's learning to be okay without you. There's a difference. What kind of difference? Marcus thought about Sophie's nightmare earlier that evening, about her fear of being forgotten, about the way she'd constructed a new definition of family from available materials. The difference is that she still hopes you'll come back. But she's not waiting for you to come back before she starts living her life. I want to see her. Then come see her. Is that okay with you? The question revealed more about the state of their relationship than any of Elena's earlier explanations. She was asking permission to see her own daughter, acknowledging that Marcus had become the primary parent through his consistency rather than any legal arrangement. Elena, you don't need my permission to see Sophie. You need to show up and stay shown up. She can handle your absence, but she can't handle false hope. What does that mean? It means if you come back, it has to be because you're ready to be here. Not because your sister made you feel guilty. Not because you're afraid of being judged. Not because you think you should want this. Because you actually want this. Elena was quiet again. In the background, Marcus could hear unfamiliar sounds. A television, voices, the ambient noise of wherever she'd been living for the past 3 months. I miss her, she said finally. I know. I miss you too. Sometimes. Elena, I know. I know we can't just go back. Too much has changed. Marcus thought about the past 3 months, about learning to braid Sophie's hair and navigate parent-teacher conferences alone, about anger management classes and probation check-ins, about Sarah Martinez and the unlikely family they'd constructed from grief and mutual understanding. Yeah, too much has changed. For all of us? Or just for you? The question was fair. Elena had left to figure herself out, but Marcus had been forced to figure himself out too. The man she'd abandoned wasn't the same person who would welcome her back. For all of us, he said honestly. Can I call Sophie tomorrow? Talk to her about maybe visiting? She'd like that. But Elena, if you're not sure, don't call. She's finally sleeping through the night again. I'm sure I want to talk to my daughter. Good. Call after school. Around 4. Okay. And Marcus? Yeah? Thank you. For taking care of her. For being the parent I couldn't figure out how to be. The line went dead before Marcus could respond, leaving him sitting in his dark bedroom, holding a phone and trying to process the conversation that might change everything, or might change nothing. Elena wanted to come back. Maybe. Sophie would be thrilled at the possibility, devastated if it didn't work out. And Sarah would probably step back, retreat to the edges of their lives to make room for Sophie's biological mother, even though she'd been more of a mother to Sophie over the past 6 weeks than Elena had been in months. Marcus set his phone on the nightstand and lay back down, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of his daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room. Tomorrow, he would have to figure out how to tell Sophie that her mother wanted to talk to her. He would have to navigate the logistics of a potential visit, the emotional complexity of co-parenting with someone who'd abdicated that responsibility, the possibility that Elena might disappoint Sophie again. But tonight, he allowed himself to appreciate the quiet stability they'd built. Sophie was safe, healthy, and surrounded by adults who showed up for her consistently. He was learning to manage his anger, to be the kind of father his daughter deserved, to build relationships that weren't defined by what was broken in them. Whatever happened with Elena, they would be okay. They'd learned how to be okay. His phone buzzed with one final text message. Sleep well. Tomorrow's a new day. Sarah, checking in the way she always did, offering the kind of steady presence that had become the foundation of their reconstructed life. Marcus typed back, "Thank you. For everything. Thank you for letting me be part of it." Marcus smiled in the darkness, thinking about chosen family, and second chances, and the radical possibility that sometimes the people who hurt you most are also the people best positioned to help you heal. Outside, Denver slept under its blanket of city lights, full of people making their own complicated choices about love and forgiveness, and the daily work of showing up for the people who mattered most. Inside apartment 2B, a single father fell asleep, planning how to tell his daughter that her mother might be ready to try again, while hoping that whatever happened, they wouldn't lose the peace they'd worked so hard to build. Some stories ended with dramatic reunions or permanent separations. This story was ending with something more complex and perhaps more valuable: the understanding that families could be rebuilt from whatever materials were available, and that love, real love, was measured not in grand gestures, but in the consistency of small, daily choices to keep showing up. Even when showing up was hard, even when showing up meant facing the people you'd failed, even when showing up meant accepting that healing looked different than you'd expected, but was no less real for being imperfect. If you enjoy this story, I want you to click the subscribe button for more stories like this. This will mean a lot for the channel. Thank you.